are so excited to have Lisa Hofer on the show today. Lisa, welcome. Hello.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh,
Thanks
thank
for joining us.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So I actually have talked to Lisa a couple times virtually over social media, and we finally I was like, oh my gosh, we need to have Lisa on the show. So we're so excited for you to be here. Lisa, can you just tell everybody kind of what you do as your day job, which is super cool, and we'll get into that, and kind of just what your involvement is with Formula One.
Yeah, so I hope you don't get it straight away from my accent, but I'm basically a German sports journalist. I'm working for RTL, which is a private network in Germany, one of the biggest in Europe, and they're broadcasting all different kind of sports, F1 for the last 20 something years, also lots of football. They're starting the NFL this season, so there's
Oh, wow.
different kind of sports, but F1 has always been like my dream, my sport that's close to my heart, and I'm actually super excited that I got the chance to work in F1 the last couple of years with them.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I just seeing you post all your stuff and what you get to do in the paddock and with the drivers, I'm always like, "Oh my god, she's living my dream."
I'm
But that's
basically living my own dream, so I gotta admit that because I have so many people say that to me, like, "This is my dream. I'd love to do that one day as well." And I'm like, "Okay, I so get that. This was me like 10, 15 years ago myself, and I sometimes have to like pinch myself to feel like, okay, I really am here. It's really me doing these kind of things, because it's been a long road actually."
Yeah, I can imagine. Can you tell, like, kind of journalism, obviously, like, that is kind of where you what you wanted to do, but how did you kind of decide that sports and specifically Formula One was really were you a fan to start off and that's kind of how it got started?
Yeah, that's actually the way I got into it. I mean, I'm from Germany, so everybody knows we had like, for me, it's still the biggest driver in F1's history, Michael Schumacher. And I've basically grown up with him. And my dad used to be like a huge Formula One fan. So every single Sunday, we were watching F1 on German TV on RTL, which is the network I'm with today, which is still weird to say, basically. But yeah, I've always been a fan. So that was like my whole life, just a part being a fan of the sports. But at first, I never really thought like going into sports journalism is a thing for me or might be an option. I've always been like interested in journalism and writing. That started in school, so I decided to study journalism and public relations in Cologne in Germany. So that was like the thing that took me to that way, but it was never that clear in the beginning that I might end up in sports journalism. I mean, I was always interested in F1 and other sports as well, but I wasn't so sure what to do with my journalism thing in like general. So I just started with university. I did some internships. I did news journalism. I did some political stuff for a German newspaper. So I just decided to try different stuff, like see what brings me joy. Maybe something isn't the right thing, but I have to figure that out as well. So yeah, basically I did that. And what really brought me to F1 and to sports journalism was when I started a traineeship at RTL. I'm not sure about the US, how you get into journalism there, but in Germany, it's the usual thing to study, to do traineeships afterwards, to do some internships, or to go to some kind of journalism school that is connected with a broadcaster or like a newspaper or like a company. And that's what I did after university. I did my traineeship at RTL, and I basically decided to go there because they have like different departments. And I just wanted to meet those people I've watched on telly doing F1 for like a month and to just work with them. I didn't even have in mind back then that I might work there as well. But it was just like something I would have loved to have a peek like behind the scenes. How are these people? How are they working? And yeah, I worked there for 6 months during my traineeship and felt like, okay, that's it. I know a lot about the sports. I love it. Why not work in sports journalism? It was like, it sounds pretty weird actually because I've been a fan all my life, but I didn't really consider it before until I was working there.
That's amazing. I love that. And like I also love just hearing the confidence coming from you. Like, yeah, why not? Why can't I
Yeah,
do this?
yeah. I mean, To be honest, when I started journalism, and especially in that sports area, I mean, we're living in 2023, but it's still more men than women. And I didn't have like a female role model, especially not in the sports area. It's mostly men in Germany, which isn't a bad thing, but I just never really figured that could be me as well, because I
Hmm.
just didn't think about it. It wasn't like people told me like, no, 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 there's no chance. But I didn't even felt like it might be an opportunity until I was working there and felt like, okay, I do know a lot. I am part of that team. I can do stuff for them. And I'm not too bad actually. So that was like an experience that helped me to feel like, okay, why not?
I love that. I love that so much because I mean, you are like, we talk about this sometimes on the show a lot, is like male versus female, mostly in the driving world, but I think we don't ever talk about it as much in like all the other aspects of
Right.
Formula One,
Yeah.
including journalism.
Hmm.
So, do you have a question for her? Or you don't want me to
Well,
continue?
no, I just think that's really interesting that, like you said, you grew up without kind of having that role model. But the nice part is now you can be that for the next generation, right? I mean, there can be little girls in Germany that watch you and be like, I want to do this. Like
I'm
this
That
is,
watching
is
her and I'm
yeah,
like, I want to do
yeah,
this. She's
that is so
exactly.
30.
nice. That is actually, it's a part that I love to have, and it's also something that is a bit weird at times because I feel like I'm making myself bigger than I am when I'm posting about my job, and when I'm like, it feels like bragging a bit to me personally. And I'm not that kind of person usually to just tell everyone, oh, look what I did, look who I've met. That's not like the persona I am. But I felt like I never had those people to look up to and to see that it's possible. I mean, I'm coming from a little German village, 500 people living there. I didn't have like any connection to journalism or the media or professional sports. I'm like from a working family. I was the first that studied. So I was so far away from that job I'm doing now. And I always felt like, okay, why not give people like someone who's like them and who just had that dream and who just went for it, and it's possible. So that was like the intention I had when I started to post a bit about my job and to show people what I'm doing. And it's actually one of the things that is still a bit crazy when people text me, especially when they're like 16, 17, they're still doing school, or they're looking for their first internship, or they think about what to study and they ask me for advice, and they'd be like, oh, I'd love to have that job one day as well. How did you do it? And I'm always happy to share parts of my way and how I ended up there, because I always wished I had someone to ask those questions.
Right, right.
Oh my god, I'm gonna cry. It's such a good, it's such a, but like it really is really cool. And I think too, like why it's such an emotional thing for me is like seeing, I feel like sometimes because in some of these areas of the world we don't have a lot of representation, so you think like I want to do that, but like I don't see any other women doing it. So is it possible? Is there a reason why? And like it's just so gratifying to see like you're like, no, you can do it. And what is also amazing, what I really love about the female community in motorsports is like everyone is so willing to like share the knowledge and
Mhm,
help
mhm.
and give advice and share their world with everybody to just make it a better place, and make it possible and give just that little boost of confidence. Sometimes that's what certain people need, to go follow their dreams. So it's amazing to see you doing that, not just showing it. And you should show it, by the way, Lisa, because you freaking
Yes,
earned it.
good. Yes.
That is so
And
kind. Thank you so much. I mean,
yeah,
I totally get what you say. And this is what kind of makes me proud to be a part of that community. There are so many people from different countries with different backgrounds. And it doesn't matter where you're from or how you started or where you are on your way up there. But everybody just helps each other. There's like no gatekeeping, especially that's how I feel it, especially on TikTok, which is such a positive
yeah.
platform. And people always seem like genuinely happy when they see somebody achieve something. And I've
Mm.
had like little to no hate there, like no jealousy, just people like rooting for me and be like, okay, this gives me hope, you give me hope that I can do it too, and I'm so happy that you've made it there. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, I don't deserve those kind words, because it's so weird to hear that sometimes. But I just try to give back and to inspire and motivate people to show them, well, I'm not even there yet where I like to end up. Like I just started a couple of years ago. I did like 7 races in F1, so that's not like a whole career or something, but I'm proud I started, and I'm proud I did a couple of things, and I got to do some interviews, and I've got some bigger things there that I did, and hopefully there is more to come, and I can be a part of that.
Yeah.
Good for you. I do have a question, and it might, I don't want it to sound dark, but unfortunately Brianna has some experience with kind of the, I don't know what you want to call it, the old man's club. And it's frustrating, and I'm curious, I would assume you've dealt with that as well. And I guess my question to you would be, how do you work around that, ignore it, whatever, push through it? Because unfortunately, even though, like you said, it's 2023, there are going to be people that will run into that same problem.
Yeah, I think the sad thing is that we all kind of experienced it at some point. I think when I was younger and when I was still a bit more shy and not sure like I really belong there and I do know enough, that was always like an issue I had with myself. Like, am I intelligent enough? Do I know enough? Have I earned my place there? Like, I felt always like I had something to prove. I mean, I'm a girly girl. I like to wear dresses. I like to put makeup on. So a lot of people think like you're dumb and you're just like a girly girl and you're just there for the hot looking drivers anyway to become like a girlfriend of them or something like that. That is like one of the first things I always feel like people jump to a conclusion. But I felt like the best thing I could do, or that's how I did it, I tried to just prove like I know my stuff. I know the work, I can do the work, and they will shut up eventually about one or another thing when they see that I'm here because I've earned it, I can do the work, I have good questions, I get the bigger pictures, I can explain stuff. But of course, it's at some point, I just laugh when people come at me and be like, oh, can you even explain what an undercut is? Or like, of course I know, otherwise I wouldn't be working here, but
Right.
I feel like that's questions nobody never would ask like a man, but of course they think like I'm dumb because I'm a young woman. But basically, I feel like it's part of the deal, and it's annoying that it's still like that here and there. I feel like it got better because I am more confident than I was like 5 years ago. And whenever I did like stuff and I was like, okay, I did that was a good day for me. I did a good interview, I had a good story, something like that. It kind of lifted me and I felt like, okay, why should I listen to that? I felt it was harder in the beginning when I wasn't like really sure, like, okay, can I do that? Am I good enough? Like those worries, I think we all know and have at some point.
Yeah, having that confidence in yourself is so important. And you said something there like and I feel like a lot of women feel like this. I mean, I'm not a F1 journalist for God's sake, but like I feel like every time, and maybe you feel this way too, because you're a woman and you're a little bit more visible in the sport, sometimes you feel like every time you do something, you have to prove yourself, prove that you belong there. And I think there's always this underlining fear, even for me making content, being like, oh, am I going to say something incorrect? And then that reflects on all women who are in motorsport. Do you feel that pressure sometimes, being like one of the few representations in the paddock of women?
I feel like that sometimes as well, but I feel like it's not about us. It's more about what the people make of it. I mean, like, there's so many male journalists that might be wrong sometimes, or that might mix people up when they come in a race because it's hectic. You can't even see like in a split second whose car it is. And of course, mistakes happen, and it's just like human to not know like everything at every single time right away. But if a woman makes a mistake, it's like more of a bigger deal than when a male colleague does it. So this is something I'm annoyed by, and I'm sometimes a bit intimidated myself. But then I'm like, okay, what do I have to lose? Like, okay, maybe people might talk and might think like I'm stupid, or I'm just there because they needed a woman, like that shitty stuff you hear sometimes. But I feel like you shouldn't let them win when it comes to something like that. Like, okay, try to be confident. Of course, mistakes happen, but it's not just you, it's other people, it's other male colleagues as well. So it's not the end of the world when there is something mixed up in a way at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I love don't let them win for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. Yeah.
And you're proving them wrong anyways by just being there all the time. So I mean, I commend you for that. I mean, I think, you know, anybody in the journalism area for a lot of sports, there's all kinds of different pressures, like you said, for men and women. But I think they do have different pressures subconsciously, and I think it's really important. And I'm glad that you don't let that get to you, because it can. It's really easy, I think, sometimes to let it get to you. But I'm really happy to see that you are like, no, I deserve to be here. Everyone makes mistakes, and
Yeah.
I'm killing it anyways. So
But it took me a couple of years to get there, to be fair. I mean, I'm 29 now. I started in journalism when I was 19, when I did university, and I had internships and I had days, especially when I did like my traineeship, when I came in home, and I was like, okay, do I fit in? Am I good enough? Like all those questions you ask yourself, especially when you had a bad day. So it wasn't like from the very first day that I stepped in there was like, okay, I can do it. It's just, it took a couple of years, and it took some good experiences, and especially it definitely helps when you have like good people around you. So I have lots of amazing colleagues who know that I can do the job and who support me there, and who helped me, especially during my first race weekends or my first interactions with the teams or with drivers. Or I never forget when I had like one of my first interviews, which was with Lando Norris, who I was pretty grateful that it was him, because everybody was like, oh, he's nice, you won't have an issue with him, and he's relaxed and he's like easy to talk to, and you shouldn't worry. There's like others who might be a bit tougher.
yeah.
And yeah, I was glad to have some help here and there as well, just from people who've worked there like 20 years and who welcomed me with open arms, basically.
That's amazing. That's so great that you have support like that.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So let's get into, what is it? I've always wondered this, and Matt and I got a little taste of it last year at our first GP. We got to go in the pit lane, which wasn't the paddock, but it was chaos upon chaos. What is it like for you on a race weekend? It's a long weekend. It must be draining. What is that like for you as a journalist? And yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about that experience?
I think chaos is basically the perfect word to describe those 4 to 5 days, because what most people don't know, we actually usually arrive on Wednesday. So we set up like our media tent for the broadcasters. We have to check like infrastructure. We have to find our ways around. And Thursday is like the biggest day for us journalists, since it's the media day. So I don't think like fans even know a lot about that, but that is basically like the busiest day for us, because you have like the press conferences, you have like the media briefings, you get most one-on-one with drivers or team principals on Thursday. So Thursday is a pretty long day full of work, and Wednesday and usually also Tuesday is like the time where you have to prepare, where you have to travel to the tracks. And once it's Friday, things get a bit easier, because it's more about the racing, and it's more like the day-to-day stuff to check like, okay, who's done what in training sessions or what happened in quali. But actually the Thursday is like the craziest day. But when you go from how crowded is the paddock or how tight is the schedule, well, of course Sunday is like the craziest day, because the paddock usually is just crowded on Sunday with so many people that are guests from sponsors, guests from teams. Like, of course, media is showing up on Sunday even more than on a Thursday or a Friday. But to be honest, for me, it's still like a bit of a fever dream whenever I'm working there those days, because it's like, okay, I'm there. Yeah, of course, I know my stuff, I know my work. But whenever you don't work and just like have 10 minutes off and you're drinking a coffee and you look around and you're like, okay, I'm actually sitting in the paddock. And I just chatted to those people, and I'm having like another interview line up in like half an hour with whoever. It's still a bit insane for me. I feel like it's still a bit new for me, and I'm still super excited because I haven't done it for like 20 years. I have like colleagues that have done it for basically 20 years straight, so they're far more relaxed about it.
Right.
And it's not all glamorous for them as well. And it's not all glamorous. I think that's something people might forget. It's long hours on days especially like Thursday, or when there is like a bigger incident or there is like weather chaos. So we're like the first ones to arrive at a racetrack at like 8 a.m. in the morning, and we're like the last ones to leave with the teams and like the people working in the hospitalities. But yeah, it's a long day. It's a lot to do, but for me, it's still like a privilege to just be there and to call that work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, does being a journalist get in the way of being an F1 fan? Like, do you still have favorite team, favorite driver, or is it hard to do that? And I know journalists try to be unbiased, but everybody has their favorite team, their favorite,
Yeah, I
driver.
feel like you can't get into the sport and have like a passion for it if you're not also a fan. Of
Right.
course, that is like a different story when I'm doing my job. When I'm doing my job, I know like I'm the journalist Lisa there. I do my work. I'm not biased. I ask the same questions for the same teams, or when there's
Mhm.
like stories coming up. I was doing the race in Spa last year, where they had those huge thing with Oscar Piastri between Alpine and McLaren, when they're, well, basically nobody knew what was written in his contract, but
Mhm.
Alpine claimed like, okay, he belongs to us. And McLaren said like, okay, no, we got him and it's legally right. And of course you have like teams to know better, or more people from one side than the other, but that doesn't have to play a part. Then you have to ask like the questions, you get your facts, and you just do your job. But if people ask me and I've answered honestly, or you can even see when you check like my Instagram post from 5 years ago when I wasn't working there. Of course, I do have a favorite driver, and of course, I do have a favorite team. Like, I've been a fan for like my whole
Mhm.
life, so why should I try to hide that? But it doesn't get to play a part when I'm doing my job, and I feel like it would be a problem if that was taking over my work, and when I was more of a fan and be like a fangirl and not like a serious, proper, trained journalist.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know how you do that because like Charlotte Claire bats his eyes like once and I like fall over. So you literally be like, I have an interview question for you, and I've forgotten my entire interview.
I get that. To be honest, I sometimes feel like there's two versions of me. When I'm watching a race at home, or when I'm doing like my whole life as a fan, of course, it's different than working there and be like having that attitude like it doesn't mean like that much to me because it's just my job. But I mean, when I was the first time at a racetrack, which was in 2018 when I was doing the traineeship, and that was when we still had a German race in Hockenheim. And that was my first time at a track and my first time at the paddock. And I didn't really have a job there. They just took me along because it was a trainee. And I was like,
Right.
oh, yeah, I didn't have like anything to do. But since we were a broadcaster and we had like our home race, like so many people were going to be there and to work there, I was like, well, I can help. Like, I'll just come along and I'll just do whatever
Right.
like need. And yeah, that was like I was just like living my biggest fangirl dream. I don't think I've ever mentioned it, but I didn't really do much besides like waiting for drivers to show up to take a photo for just myself.
Yeah.
We're just like, okay, I just want to get one photo with, you know. And yeah, I was just so happy when that happened. I felt like, okay, that is weird. And basically a year later, when I knew I was going to stay there and they'll take me on after my traineeship, it was a weird weekend and it was a tough weekend because it was Spa 2019 where the crash of Antoine Hubert happened. So
Ugh.
that was like a pretty rough weekend to get to know the
Mhm.
job, and that yeah, shook things up to say that. And I felt like I was in a different role because I knew I wasn't no longer there as like a fan to live like my
Yeah.
fan dream. I was
Mhm.
there to learn the job and to get prepared for the 2020 season. That basically then never happened like it was supposed to happen
Yeah.
because of
Right,
COVID.
right.
Oh
But
no.
yeah, but it was a rough start. You can hear that. I mean, being trained for the job at a race where a F2 driver dies. I mean, that is like the worst thing to experience. Like, I really
Yeah.
have to say it like that. It was like awful. And I felt like, okay, wow, that is like part of that world too, because I feel
Mhm.
like people tend to forget that it's still like super dangerous and that people can actually die. And
Right.
especially for the younger people like myself, I've experienced the death of Jules Bianchi, but I was too young to be at the track, and it was different because he was injured and he was in hospital for a couple of months. But I mean, in Spa at the Hubert crash, we knew like 2 hours later, okay, shit, someone just died at the
Yeah.
track. So that was tough to be fair. And yeah, 2020 was completely different then as well. But
Right.
Yeah.
luckily last year was a bit more normal with COVID being almost gone, and I got to have like nicer F1
Right.
experiences.
Well, I'm curious though, looking back on that, do you think that that helped you as a journalist going through like your first race, seeing something awful like that, and then, obviously the COVID season and everything like that? That must have been really challenging, but maybe in hindsight, you think it made you better at what you do?
Well, basically, to say it like that, I felt like when I was in Spa when the Hubert crash happened, I felt like that everybody there is just human as well. Even though I looked up to those people, and I was like in a bit of a shock when I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's this person. Oh my gosh, you have to talk to them." I was like still in awe that I'm there, that I'm working there. But then, from one second to another, I just felt like, okay, these people are just like me when it comes
Mhm.
to like the core, like something really, really bad happens. It doesn't matter if you're like a driver, if you're a team principal, if you're a fan, if you're a journalist, everybody just experiences this the same. And actually, I felt like a bit, I felt a bit ashamed because I had to cry at one point, like in the paddock, because I was
Mhm.
seeing his family, his mother and his brother were there, and they were having his helmet, and there was like a minute of silence. And to be honest, to see that, that just broke my heart. And I didn't even
Yeah.
know that. I didn't even know the kid personally. I mean, of course, I've watched F1 because at that time F1 was still like the main thing, and I followed F2 because Mick was in F2 back then. And as a German, of
Right.
course, we always watched out for Mick. But I didn't know Antoine. I've never spoken to him. But just to see like a young kid dying when he was trying to fulfill and to reach his dream of F1. And there's his mother, his brother, they're having his racing helmet. And a lot of the people from the F1 paddock, since he was close to Renault back at the time, and he had friends like Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, Charles Leclerc. They're
Yeah.
all like the same group of people that have known each other, and just to see what something like that does to them made me
Mhm.
realize, okay, they're just people as well. There is no shame in crying, even though in the first second I felt like unprofessional because I stood there and I just couldn't hold it back. But in a way,
Right.
I feel like what worse can happen at a race weekend, to put it like that. So I felt
Yeah.
like I've had like the worst thing you can experience and to be a part of. So everything afterwards was definitely easier and not that
Mm.
Mhm.
bad, even when it was like raining or there were like issues or like hazy situations, but nothing was like that bad. I mean,
Right.
Silverstone and the crash from Guan Yu Zhou in Silverstone, that put me back to that situation for a second because you just saw the crash and you didn't know what was going on. So I felt like back in time and it was like, okay, don't let him be dead. That was like the
Right.
first thing that came to my mind, and that were the same feelings. But I feel
Yeah.
that was like everybody was so relieved to see that he got away from it, like
Yeah.
with no injury at all. But yeah, if you
Yeah.
experience stuff like that, I think like it can't get worse, and it helps you in a way to see like the people that are actually doing the job, like the human side there, not just
Mhm.
the sport.
Mhm.
Yeah, and not just that, I imagine, like, obviously you're there, you're a journalist, so reporting on the goings on of things at the track is your job. So, like, not only do you have to process that emotion and your feelings as a human being, but then you have to kind of
Right.
set that aside and separate it
Yeah.
and be like, okay, I now have to do my job and do it
Yeah,
in a good way. And that doesn't mean your emotions can't get into it, especially when you're dealing with a
Death.
human life.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, but I can't imagine, like, your first weekend working something like you said, like, probably the worst thing that could happen at a
Mm.
track happens,
Mhm.
but it probably put so much into perspective for you from your day one of like, okay, the sport's amazing, it's fun, but it's also deadly, and like
Right.
it can go wrong at any second. So
Definitely. And I mean, because it was the working weekend, I was supposed to be still learning. I didn't have to do as much as my colleagues who were already doing it for a couple of years, but
right.
it helped me to see how they handled the situation. I mean, how do you approach a team that just lost one of its drivers? How do you talk to people?
Right.
What is appropriate to ask? Or I mean, from like my human side, of course, I don't want to ask anything. I just want to leave them alone. But
Yeah.
usually in journalism, to just not do anything, to not go to people, to not ask for a statement or stuff like that. But it felt good actually to see that when tragic events like that happen, of course, it is completely fine to not be the first to go after a statement or something like that, because
Right.
well, this is bigger than like be the first to have like a statement. Like you're still human, and that is part that counts as well, you know. So that helped me to see that, especially my station and my network, there's still like have a human side, even when it's a big business and you want to publish stories.
Right. Yeah, honestly, thank you for sharing that, because I feel like as fans, we don't ever see that side of when like something tragic like that happens in the paddock. You see it on track and you see what the TV shows you, but you don't really see what's going on behind those garages. And to remember too, it affects every single person that is there in
Yeah.
different ways. So it's just crazy to think.
It is. It's I can't imagine. And you know, I'm also thinking like the Romain Grosjean crash as well, and
Yeah.
I'm sure
Oh
it's
my
the same
gosh.
thing
Yeah.
for you. You know, it's such a unique sport in that these incredibly talented human beings are putting their life at risk every single day, and you don't see that until Guan Yu Zhou's car flips over, and you know, it just things can change so quickly.
You kind of
And
forget that it
you
can.
exactly,
Yeah.
and
I
you
mean,
know, you just yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good thing in a way that the sport has gotten so much safer, that we don't have like as many deadly crashes as we used to have like 30 years ago. Because, well, to look back at a couple of decades ago, of course, it was a bit more common that like drivers just died because the cars
Yeah.
weren't that safe, and there weren't like things to test cars and to put like safety procedures in place. But just like you said, we tend to forget that it's still dangerous, that those drivers still risk their lives. And of course, people say like, oh, they get paid so much money and it's a privilege to be in F1. Of course, they know that themselves, but it's still a risk they take for our entertainment in the end, you know. And that's a part a lot of people, I feel like, forget. And I was, to be honest, super happy when Pierre Gasly spoke up last year after Japan, when the
Yes.
tractor
Yeah.
came on track, and when he really raged, and it was like, haven't we learned? Like, we're risking our lives, and you're playing with our lives. And I've heard a lot of people that didn't get why he was so angry about that. And I was like, well, he lost a friend, and he's
Yeah.
seen someone he's been close to his whole life die on a track, and they put him in danger. So of course he's angry, you know. And I feel
Right.
like people tend to forget that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It is a part of the sport that I think, we're all very passionate about it. I think we just kind of had a similar thing here in the US with the NFL, with football, with
Oh my gosh, yeah, Damar Hamlin. Oh yeah.
yeah. I think like we don't think about that. Like, and usually with football, it's more like the long-term effects of what you do to your body. And we don't ever see that after these guys retire. We don't ever see like how they can't get up from a chair at home or stuff like that, or they're suffering like brain injuries. And but like seeing that, I think it kind of put into perspective for a lot of people, like, hey, like he was perfectly healthy. And like that can happen if you get hit real hard. That can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just
But also, I think
something
it's a
people
testament.
forget.
Yeah.
And I think you brought this up briefly too, and I think it's a testament to the people who are there for all sports, the medical staff that's there. Like those people are genuine lifesavers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that
Definitely.
that is something that I think, the term hero might be like thrown around too much, but like those people are
No, for sure.
true heroes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
they're giving up their time to be there. I mean, at every racetrack, there's so many volunteers, so many marshals. They don't get paid or don't get paid a lot, so they just do it because they want to do it. They're passionate about it, and they want to be a part of that. And especially when accidents happen, like you just mentioned, the Grosjean fire accident. If it wasn't for those marshals running to him, for those medical people to show up within seconds, well, it could have had a completely different ending. So, we should all appreciate them, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as we mentioned like earlier, obviously we don't get to see a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Is there something that happens like in the paddock when you're at work or whatever that you think would be surprising to some fans?
Well, I feel like people always imagine it's way more glamorous than it actually is. I mean, when you see it on TV and when you see like celebrities just walking up and down, having like a fancy drink, having good dinner, having like a good spot to watch the race. When we're working in the paddock, you don't even see the track. Basically, we watch it on little screens as well when we're not in a garage. So people always, so people, I think that's like the thing that at least it was the same for me. I always thought it's way more glamorous and way more like a high profile event, and basically it's just work. Many people that work their asses off to say like that, especially at the teams. I feel like people don't even know how big those teams are, because you tend to see like the drivers, obviously the team principals, maybe the PR people from those teams that follow the drivers during the interviews. But there's so many men and women setting up those motorhomes, setting up those hospitalities, the garage. They're driving the trucks with the cars and the pieces of like everything around like Europe. They ship it to like Australia. So there is so much going on behind the scenes, and it's such a huge thing. People, well, of course they're not going to see it because they just arrive when everything is set up. But I feel like, especially when there is always those discussions like, oh, do we have enough races, or 22 races, 23 races? Oh, why not 30 races? Well, it's a lot of work for those people you'll never hear about or you'll never see, because there is a lot going on behind the scenes. When there is like the podium ceremony, that was actually a funny thing when I first saw that. When the podium ceremony is still going on and like the first three drivers, okay, you celebrate them, their teams are there and celebrating them. The other drivers are doing media. But in those 30 minutes maybe that all takes, the other teams just shut down their garages. They're building the stuff down, and they're like super quick to get that car into pieces, to get their stuff, and to just wrap everything up and to go to the next thing. So that was a bit weird when I first saw that. But I came back from the podium ceremony at one track, and I walked past the garages, and there was like, okay, there was not much left. Because I like, you're like people just pack their stuff, and they're like, we have a tight schedule. And of course, when the race ends on a Sunday night and you have to be at the next track on maybe Tuesday to have your motorhomes ready, to have the garage ready, because on Wednesday people arrive, on Thursday drivers arrive. It's a tight schedule. But to see that, I was like, okay, well, that is quick, but it's not that glamorous. It's a lot of work for those people in the teams. I feel like they don't get enough credit they deserve.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine you're like walking to the podium ceremony, and then you're done. You're walking out and you're like, wait, wasn't the McLaren garage just there?
It's empty now.
Oh, gone.
Like okay, you still see like one piece of a car, or you see some big boxes and people putting stuff in there, but basically it's like gone in a couple of hours, and you're like, okay. But of course it makes sense for them. If they have nothing to celebrate there, why not start the work to pack things up?
They're like, no, we're leaving. We're done with
this. I've always thought the logistics of F1 is just as fascinating as the race itself, because like you said, I mean, they could be going from Australia to Italy, or wherever, whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you got to get everything on a tanker, and it truly, like you said, it truly is amazing how that can all be organized and how many people are involved to make sure that goes
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. I have to ask because, of course, you get this access to drivers that a lot of people will never, ever in their life get access to. Let me ask you a couple questions on this because I personally want to know.
Yeah.
Who, when you had your first interview, you mentioned it was with Lando Norris. What is that like when you interview a driver? Do you have a set amount of time? Do you have to ask certain questions? Like, what is that like going into that situation?
So there is basically two scenarios. The first one is like the more common when they're doing the media pen on Thursday. There is like those, I'm quite sure you've seen it, or most people might have
Yes.
seen it. Like
Mhm.
there's the thing set up with the barriers. They're all media stations put together in like little groups. Usually it's
Mhm.
done by the countries so that the German people that speak German are together, that when we have like a German driver, we can ask German questions, not in English, which makes more sense for
Right.
us in a way. So when you have those interviews, it's usually just a couple of questions. So you don't have like all the time in the world because you have like 20 other stations waiting for the driver to come over. And usually it's just like 30 minutes in total for like 5 or 6 drivers. And there's other colleagues in your group. So you have like 2 or 3 questions. So usually that isn't that deep and you can't really build up a conversation. Well, you just have like 2 or 3 questions, but that is like the most common scenario because the drivers have to do those interviews. That is part
Yeah.
of their contract, and there's like, yeah, there's like your chance to ask what you really need to ask, and you get every driver there over the weekend to get your questions out there. So that is like blink and you miss it in a way.
Yeah.
That is like the one scenario. And no, you don't have to tell the drivers or the teams what kind of questions you'd like to ask beforehand. Maybe the PR person comes up and just gives you a hint, like they want to answer a question about whatever happened last week, or they've talked about that a lot, so please don't ask about that again. So that is like a little hint, but you can ask whatever you'd like to ask. You're a journalist, so you're there to ask. And
Right.
the better scenario, which is a bit harder to get, is like the one-on-one interview with the driver. So you have to schedule those interviews with the teams directly. You just go and ask those team PR people, like, we will be there next week. We're planning like a feature on Lando Norris. That was like the first one-on-one I had. And we'd love to have like 10 minutes just one-on-one with Lando. And usually it's like 10 to 15 minutes. So it's not like the super long interviews
Right.
you'd love to have, but it's compared to those other chances you get, it's like a whole new dimension of like 10 or 15 minutes alone. Just you, no other journalists, no other media, just you and the driver. So that is like the better thing, to really build a conversation, to really dive deeper in a question. But for that interview, most teams ask what topics you'd like to talk about. So you don't send out like questions. I'll never send out like type down questions because, well,
Right.
if you hand out your questions right before or even during an interview, but of course I get that people want to prepare their drivers a bit what's
Right.
coming up, especially just to give you like an example, when we were doing races that have like a bigger meaning in Germany, like Spa is just one of those races because it was one of Michael's best tracks. It's close to Germany. A lot of German fans are there. And we're at the race in Austria like 4 or 6 weeks before Spa. We already prepare our TV show for Spa. So I might sit in Austria with a driver and ask questions about Spa, which is in like 6 weeks. So,
Okay.
so
Interesting.
yeah, so we need to do that to get like the interviews done when Spa arrives. So it would be too late to just meet up in Spa and ask about Spa when everybody's asking about Spa. So you have to do that before. But of course, it's not the first one thing the driver thinks about when we're doing an interview in Austria. Like, okay, she's coming up with Spa stuff, so you might want to prepare something for that. So
Right.
I'll give them a little hint, like, of course, we'll talk about the race weekend in Austria, about the last races, this and this, but we'd also love to include a couple of questions about Spa, since it's like big for us in 6 weeks. So they get the
Right.
topics, but
Gotcha.
they'll never get the questions. At least that's something I'll never do, but that wouldn't make sense. And then it's just like, to be honest, I was a bit afraid before my first one-on-ones because you never know what the vibe is. And if you
Yeah.
maybe have like a question the driver or the team principal doesn't like, but usually you get a pretty good feeling like what to ask and how to ask, and just like they're humans at the end of the day. So
Mhm.
if you
Right.
have some empathy, you'll get along, especially when you have to ask tougher questions like I had in Spa last year when I was doing an interview with Ottmar Schaffnauer from Alpine when that all Piastri drama played out.
Oh my
I was I was tough on him. I was really, really tough. My questions weren't nice, but he knew everybody would ask like those
Yep.
questions like what's
Right.
going on? Do you not know your contract? What's going on with Fernando? Did he not inform you? Of course he knew, and of course it's my job to ask those not so nice questions then, and they're there for that as well.
Right. Yeah, that I can't imagine having to do that.
It's probably a fine line that you have to walk to not make them just get up and leave, but like you said, you need to get the answers, but you need to be kind enough in a way to not
Yeah.
you know, degrade them or
Or
something like that.
disrespect,
Yeah,
yeah.
disrespect
Yeah,
them.
that's just the word you said, respect. I mean, I'm doing my job. He knows I have to ask
Mhm.
those questions. I mean, he
Right.
knows that everybody's talking about that, and he knows that the picture that Alpine is standing on the outside isn't the best at the situation. Then, so of course,
Right.
people ask tougher questions, and not like, "Oh, Otmar, how unfair is it?" Like, no, you have to be like a journalist and ask like real questions, but you shouldn't be rude or disrespectful.
Mhm.
There is a
Yeah.
fine line, but I feel like when you're trained, at least that's how I feel. I'm trained for this, so
Mhm.
I usually know how to handle it, like to ask my questions and to make my point, but to still be respectful even when the questions aren't nice.
Right. Yeah. Who has been your favorite driver or even team principal? Because I know you've interviewed both. Who's your favorite to like chat with and interview?
I gotta admit that, and I think most people know when they check out my social media stuff. I just love Daniel Ricciardo. I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing to not love about this man. He's been the funniest. I've had him a couple of times in a one-on-one, and especially last year when it was hard at McLaren and when his situation wasn't easy, he was still so professional. He was still funny. He didn't let people feel like he might have not like the most fun doing those interviews and those people asking those questions. He still made it fun and made it like a positive thing. And I
Yeah.
appreciated that so much. I mean, I gotta admit I've been a fan of him before I worked there as well. So
Right.
okay, well,
A little bias, just a tad.
well, just a bit, but I gotta admit he's been the funniest. We had so many funny things in his interviews, and he just always tried to make them fun. Like even when there was like sometimes it just have got like the same questions, like
Right.
probably 5 other journalists asked like in the
Mhm.
day before, but he still made it fun in a way, and he never felt like you're boring me with your questions. You just
Yeah.
flipped it to a positive thing, and that's something I appreciate so much, because I get when they're not into answering like questions all day. It's like the thing they don't like about their job. They just want to drive, but
Yeah.
he still makes it fun, and yeah, gives you a lot to work with. So yeah, I
Nice.
have to stick to Danielle.
Yeah. I have to ask on the other end of the spectrum, who is not so fun? Who is not so fun? And
Throw
then not
somebody under the
they
bus.
don't have to be like a bad way. Maybe they just like I get it. Some of these guys, like you said, they've been asked the
Right.
same question by every single journalist, and you might be the very last journalist in line
Right.
at
Right.
the time. Like who's maybe not the best?
Well, to be honest, there was nobody who was like not kind or not respectful, or that is something I appreciate. Like everybody answers, everybody's showing respect, and never had like a driver just go and leave and be like,
Leave.
okay, I'm done. So I was like, okay, I feel like I've done an okay job, because nothing like
Mhm.
that happened. But there's drivers, especially from a German perspective, that just don't play a big role in our coverage, to say it like that.
Mm.
Like we focus in Germany, of course, we focus on all the German drivers. Now there's just one left. A little bit different. this year, but usually we focus on the German drivers and like the ones fighting for the championship, like Verstappen, Hamilton,
Right.
like the bigger drivers in general. So
Mhm.
there's drivers I haven't talked to as much as others, so I don't know them like well. When you've talked to like a Daniel Ricciardo like 5 times in 3 months, he at least remembers your face and know you're like okay to work with.
Right.
But when you're like a new face for someone, it might be different. So I think nothing was really bad, or well, to be honest, like I didn't get a lot from Lance Stroll. He was nice, he was okay, but he wasn't like super funny, or I didn't feel like he's super into it and enjoying doing media work.
Right.
So that was still an okay interview. I still got what I needed, but I didn't get like a vibe like okay, he's having fun, he's enjoying this, which is okay
Right.
as well, because I know, I mean, like Kimi famously said the last years, he's there to drive. He
Yeah.
doesn't even care for any shit outside driving. So why even bother?
Yeah.
Maybe it just was one of those days for Lance as well. But yeah, I can't really say anything too negative about anyone. In the end, they're
Right.
all professional.
Yeah. You're not the first F1 journalist I've heard say that about Lance. I forget what other podcast I was listening to. They were interviewing an F1 journalist, I think from ESPN. I'm not sure. But he literally said, like, I've never, Lance Stroll makes F1, like the way he talks about F1, make it sound boring. like he does, like he doesn't. And I mean, like, that just might be his delivery. But I always, every time I watch those Kimmy interviews, like, you know, the
Oh, they're
clip,
the best.
I always
They're the
felt so
best.
bad for the journalists because they were like, "How's the race today?" Good.
Yeah.
They're like,
I would have
okay, well,
loved I would have loved to be around and to interview him. I mean, it would have been so tough for me because, well, basically, when somebody's not giving you a lot to work with, it makes your job pretty hard. But he's
right,
always done it in such a fun way, and that you kind of
Right.
celebrated it.
Right.
So
you
I
just
think that's
expected it.
yeah. And especially when he was answering like longer, you were like, oh my gosh, what's happened there? You
Yeah.
just celebrated even more.
Is this
So
really
yeah,
Kimi Räikkönen under those
yeah.
sunglasses, or is this his body double? 'Cause that's crazy. I mean, yeah, I can't. I know from working in professional sports too, when we would do media stuff, sometimes we would get warnings from people like, okay, this certain person hates this, so let's get this through quickly. Or it would be, hey, this person, like, you know, they don't really
Yeah.
care.
I
Yeah.
mean, you get to know drivers in a
Hmm.
way. I mean, of course, he's a German, so there's like a different connection as well. But when we talk to Sebastian Vettel, we know that, of course, he talks about racing and he likes racing, but there's other things close to
Mhm.
his heart he'd love to talk about. Like he's got so many
Yeah.
projects going on. He's designed like t-shirts to raise awareness for different things. So of course, if I know that somebody wants to talk about something and I feel like, oh, this might be a good icebreaker, that might be a good thing, of course, I'll ask something I'll imagine they'd like to talk about before I get to like a question I still have to ask, but they're not too happy maybe to answer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a
Mhm.
really good that's a really good idea. I wanted to ask you too. Obviously, you're a German journalist, you're a German fan, you're from Germany. What was it like this year to be trackside and experience Sebastian Vettel's last year in Formula One and his last race? What was that like for you?
Well, to be honest, I wasn't at his last race. I was in Brazil, which was like the second to last. So for me, it was like a big thing because I kind of grew up with him in a way. I mean, of course,
Mhm.
it started with Michael, but Zepp was like the number two after Michael that came into the picture for me as a fan when I was like 12, 13. And when he was like first world champion, I was still at school. So being there during his last races, having like fulfilled my own dream and be like there working with him. I actually told him in Brazil, which was like, okay, should I do it? Should I ask for a photo? And be like, oh, this means a lot because usually I don't approach drivers and ask for like pictures or autographs or stuff
Right.
like that
Mhm.
because I'm there to work. They're doing their job, and it's not part of my job to ask for like fan photos.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But when I was like in Brazil, and I knew it's the last time I'll see him at an F1 race, and we had like a super long interview. One of my colleagues did, who basically did his whole career with him. He's done the interviews for our German station with him during like 20 years. So he was there from the super very first beginning when he was like 17 and had like those first test drives. And now he was at his last race. We broadcasted. That was insane to watch because they kind of grew up together. And I was like, I was just like happy to be there and to watch that. And well, yeah, I approached him after this interview my colleague did, and I was like, okay, so I have to ask for a picture. I've never done that before, but it would just mean a lot because I kind of grew up with you. And he laughed and he was like, how old are you? You don't even look that old to have grown up with me. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not 20, I'm closer to 30, but yeah, basically you were there after Michael, and I was still a fan when you were like having the best time of your career with the Red Bull. And he was so kind and so funny when I told him like, it means a lot because he fulfilled his dreams in F1, and I kind of reached my dream of being there as a journalist when he was still around to be a driver. So I was like, okay, I missed Michael at F1 because I was too young, but I made it with him possible to talk to him, to interview him. And yeah, I got my photos. So that was perfect. That was a bit emotional, but yeah, in the end, I really just hope he stays in the wider F1 bubble. Maybe he comes back in a couple of years in one role or another. I mean, I think a lot of teams are keen to have him on board. I mean, you can hear that from Red Bull, especially. They'd love to have him like in a management kind of role. Maybe with Audi coming into F1 soon, there might be something coming up, especially since they got Andreas Seidel, which Sepp knows for quite a long time. So I really hope like in a couple of years, he'll be back in whatever kind of role. But yeah, he's done a lot for F1. He's done a lot for German fans on F1. So I really feel like he deserves some time with his family, with his children, all the other things he'd love to do aside from F1. And yeah, it was emotional, but I just felt happy that I got to experience it and to talk to him as a journalist before he retired.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Selfishly, I wish he would stick around because he's, an amazing driver and an even better human being. But like you said, he deserves, to do what he wants and to relax, because
for sure.
Yeah, I think he'll go down as one of the most well-liked drivers. When he was dominating at Red Bull, especially like the British media didn't really like him. But as he's leaving, everybody's heartbroken because everybody loves him,
I feel like there was a bit of a change. I mean, when he was on top with Red Bull, of course, people didn't like him because he wasn't British and he wasn't racing for a British team. Of course, he was like the anti-persona. But I feel like especially those years at Ferrari where he didn't win the championship, where he had like a young Leclerc coming up, putting up a fight, it kind of changed something within him as well. And also COVID did, like those months without racing and getting to know other things, and just like putting his mind on other areas, and to feel like, okay, there is like a planet we're having trouble with and we should make a difference. And I felt like he really evolved as a person, and that's what made people respect him even more.
Oh, definitely. Are there any other questions before I ask her the final question?
My one final question would be, kind of 2023 predictions. And, if you think we're safe, or I'm curious if you have any hot takes for us.
Yeah. What do you think's going to happen in 2023?
Well, to be honest, this is purely the fangirl speaking, because I don't have any insights on the new cars or what happened during the winter break. Like, we don't even know either. As journalists, we don't know a lot more than fans at the moment. But since I've grown up as a Ferrari fan, I just hope it's a year where Ferrari will be strong, like a new world champion. I'd love to see that, like Charles Leclerc or Carlos Sainz. I'll root for that. Like, everybody's a Ferrari fan in the end, we all know. And I'd love to see that. I mean, of course, Red Bull will be strong. Mercedes will be strong. I'm excited to see what George Russell will come up with. He was pretty strong last year too. Got his first win, which I was super happy to have seen. And so I'm just hoping we're in for like an exciting season, like a tight season, Like
Yeah.
not last year where we had like a couple of races left when everything was basically decided. But yeah, I love to see Ferrari put up a fight at the front.
Boy.
Oh, you and me both, girl. You and me both. Literally, I made a TikTok the other day and it was like, your worst fear, Ferrari messing up Charles Leclerc's chances
Oh,
of winning
yeah.
2026. It is literally a
I'm-
painful experience being a Ferrari fan, but
Oh.
we come back every year. I don't know why.
Yeah,
But
I mean, seriously, when things go bad, at some point it can't get worse. And I feel
Yeah.
like they had that point last
Right.
year. Like so many
Right.
things went badly last year, so it just have to get better like this season.
yeah, let's hope.
I'm more confident sure than I am with Mattia. So I think they'll be all right.
Yeah. Okay, final question for you. And I feel like this is going to be one of those typical journalistic questions that you But what is your advice to anybody who, and especially women, I guess, who want to get into Formula One? What advice would you give to them?
Well, basically, it sounds so simple, like yet so small to just go for it, to just try and achieve it. Like if you're doing university or if you're not doing university, just try to find a point where you can start. I feel like it's so amazing that we have like TikTok, YouTube, like all those platforms where you can create content. You don't need like a network or like a newspaper to just publish your content to talk about the things you love to talk about. So just start at the point where you can start. I mean, if you're studying journalism and you're doing internships and you've made that like professional step in that way, good for you. That's like the more classical way, I'd say. That's how I got into it. But I feel like now is just the perfect time for so many people to get into that bubble, even when you're not a trained journalist or when you didn't go to uni or when you're not like having a journalistic background, because like so many people are getting into it, which I love to see just from starting a community themselves. Like on TikTok, there's so many amazing women. I've seen like so many of them were at the Red Bull Lounge in New York, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're going places. They really made it. If it's Lissy or if it's like so many amazing women like Tony and I think I hope you guys who listen know them as well.
I know.
And yeah, I mean, they haven't studied journalism or worked with a network or stuff like that. They just started to do what they love, which is like good content, focusing on motorsports and F1. And I feel like just believe in yourself and just go for it. If you're not trying, you can't achieve anything. And I get that people feel like, okay, am I good enough? Or who might see it? Is it embarrassing? Whatever, just just go for it, do it, and just give it a try. If you'll never try, you'll never know. And maybe it works not out like straight away, but maybe in 2 or 3 years. So I feel like just go for it. Not to be intimidated or embarrassed, just like try and do what you'd love to do.
Yeah,
I love that advice.
I think that's great.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show today. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out for you in the paddock this year.
Sure.
And maybe we'll be lucky enough to meet you in person sometime.
Oh, I love that to happen, actually. Thank you guys so much for like being interested in my journey and having me on the show. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, of course.